So I took the email from the juror's cousin and I compared it to the email from this captain from the Niceville Police Department. They are word for word exactly the same. Word for word. What does that sound like? If you watch the other podcast, you know what that sounds like. Word for word, really. I find that hard to believe. So, did Ms. Daly, is this truthful or was it fabricated? I never thought to call Captain Whitfield and ask him if he actually communicated with Ms. Daly. That would be an interesting conversation to have, and I will be having that this week. So that was her response with the exhibits. Now, that came out in January of 2022. Keep in mind that, well, then we had a hearing. The judge ordered a juror interview of this juror. So 2 months after all of that, the judge ordered a juror interview. And it was only 3 months after that that Ms. Daly was allowed to resign from the state attorney's office. So just before she resigned, we had a hearing based on the newly discovered evidence of this juror. And we had a juror interview where she was actually called in to Judge Merritt's courtroom. 2 months after Ms. Daly sent all those emails and talked to the ex-husband and the whole thing and wrote that scathing response, 2 months later, she was already off the case. So we went into this hearing with a different assistant state attorney. Ms. Daly was not at this hearing. I thought that was highly suspect until later, and I realized why. But I want to just read a few of these excerpts because this hearing, keep in mind, or not keep in mind, you don't know this, but Martin and I drove down to this. We live in Corson, Tennessee. We drove down to Brooksville, Florida for this evidentiary hearing. We met with Take Chan's family who were all there. So we were sitting right behind Brian Savy and Take Chan. We were sitting behind him in the courtroom. And then right behind us was all of Take Chan's family. They filled the whole side there, along with his daughter who had recanted. I got to meet her and she hugged me and she said, "Thank you for what you're doing for my dad." And it was just so touching because she was so broken still all these years later about not being believed. And it's like, how can you believe someone one time and then when they say I'm lying, and then you say, "Well, I don't believe you now. I believed you back then." How are you any less credible now than you were then? Now you're older and wiser and you've had time to reflect. That should have counted for something. Take Chan should have come home. Should have come home. And especially after all of this with the juror, now the verdict is suspect. Should have come home. But here's how the hearing went. I really, truly believed, because Judge Merritt had been so civil to us in our last interactions with him back in 2019 was the last time that we saw him. So that was 4 years later here. I thought that he would think twice about all of this. I thought that he would have had a chance to reflect back and realize that maybe, as in our case, maybe he rushed a judgment. Maybe he made a mistake. I know the last time we saw him, he stopped us as we left and he said something to the effect that, he said, "Good luck, Mr. Peterson." But before that, he said something to the effect that there's only 2 people in this world that know what happened, if anything, Mr. Peterson and the accuser. He called her an accuser, not a victim. And he said, "As for me, I have my doubts." So that was the last time we saw him. Here we are 4 years later, showing him that another juror came in and was not truthful. I really, truly expected this hearing to go differently than it did. Instead, it turned horribly, horribly bad. So in March of 2023, we have the juror interview. The juror is there. She takes a stand. She's the only witness there that day. And Mr. Savy, Attorney Savy, begins to question her. I'm just going to read a few of the excerpts from that hearing, which lasted quite a while. Attorney Savy said, all right, on Facebook, you had posted a memorial. Back in 2016, you posted something related to your uncle. Is that correct? She said, that's correct. It was actually his cousin. And then Brian said, yes. Did you think of your cousin? This is important. Did you think of your cousin on May 30th of 2012 when you were sitting here for jury selection? She said, very often I do. Attorney Savy said, so you thought of him that day? Yes. Brian asked her, and that's why I want to make it clear, so you were not officially divorced at the time of the trial. She said, no, we were separated. Brian later said, but you did have family members that were involved in an aspect of law enforcement, correct? The juror said, what my mother has told me, yes, at that time. She kept saying what my mother has told me. I haven't quite figured out what that was about. She's a grown woman. And again, I'm fast forwarding through this. It's not important to read all the backs and forths. I'm pulled out the most important statements. Attorney asked her, you would agree that if not one day goes by where you don't think of him that, and the juror interrupted and said, that's correct. And Attorney Savy said that that would be something that would have a major impact in your life. And the juror said, that's correct. Okay, so I'm sitting there thinking, Take Chan's coming home. He's coming home. He's coming home. She's just admitted she was not truthful. She was thinking about her cousin. She knew about the other. I mean, he's going home. I'm thinking in my mind, where are we going to go celebrate with this family? All these years we've waited, and now he's going to go home. Just like Martin, I'm picturing going to the jail and picking Take Chan up in paper clothes, just like I did Martin. I'm just trying not to smile and be celebratory, but that's not what happened. Brian even asked, do you recall the question being asked, do any of you have any close friends or family that are involved in any aspect of law enforcement? Now remember, Judge Merritt asked that question, and she said, I do. Brian said, do you recall that being the question? She said, I do recall that. Brian said, you mentioned that not a day goes by that you don't think of him. The juror said, that's correct. Brian said, all right. You ready? Were you thinking of your cousin, Tony Forgione, the day you went back to deliberate? Yes. Take Chan's coming home. Take Chan's coming home. Brian concluded. The assistant state attorney, who was now on the case, just had a few questions, nothing important. And I'm waiting for the ta-da. I'm waiting for the drum roll. I'm not sure that Judge Merritt's going to take it under advisement or if he's going to make a decision right here. I'm just anxiously waiting, thinking, here we go, here we go. And then Judge Merritt spoke up. Now, the juror was still sitting here to his left in the witness box. And all of a sudden, Judge Merritt turned to her and he said, let me just interject here. There was a time, my very first time I ever testified in court, the judge was right here, sitting right here. I could reach out and touch him, but of course I knew I couldn't do that. He asked a question of the defense attorney that was for me. So I started to answer and he lost it. He just went postal on me, actually not even talking to the attorney, that he's not doing that. I'm not talking, I'm not doing that. I am not interacting with this. And I'm just like, okay, so that's when I learned judges don't talk to witnesses. Judges are not defense attorneys. Judges are not prosecutors. Judges are supposed to be calling balls and strikes. Judges are supposed to be the impartial judge looking for the facts, the fact finder, as they refer to themselves. Instead, Judge Merritt turned to the juror and said, at the time of jury selection, did you know that your cousin Tony was deceased? She said, yes. He said, so at the time of the jury trial at jury selection, that cousin Tony was deceased? Yes. And with regard to Joey, did you know at the time of jury selection that he was involved in, did you know one way or another if he was involved in any law enforcement at all? No. And you said you weren't speaking to them. Was there a reason for that? Yes. Family issues back in 89, 90, I would say. My then uncle got killed in the line of duty. Excuse me, rephrase that. When my uncle got killed, murdered in Florida, my aunt ran into a lot of money with the case, and she up and left and was doing all these things and just up and left and moved to Niceville. Judge Merritt said, all right. So would it be a fair statement to say some people use this word that you were estranged from those family members and from those cousins? That's correct. Then Judge Merritt said, and then just to be clear, ma'am, so that I understand clearly, did the fact of your marital status and the fact that your associations with either Tony or Joey, did any of those three things affect your ability to evaluate the evidence and testimony that you heard in that trial in any manner whatsoever? No. Did it affect your ability to be fair and impartial to Mr. Rohe in any manner whatsoever? Yes. Yes. You just said yes. Then she said, oh, say that again. I'm sorry. I'm just very upset right now. Now I'm going to pause and say that at this particular time, now she's crying and the bailiff is looking for a box of tissues. She has gotten so rattled by Judge Merritt's demanding, leading questions. Judge Merritt said, all right, so ma'am, I need to be clear about the answer to the question. Did your marital status and the fact of whatever your association had been with your cousins, did that affect your ability in any manner whatsoever to listen to the evidence and be fair and impartial during Mr. Rohe's trial? No. All right. Did you misunderstand the question initially? Yes. Okay, so your answer is no. To be clear? Right. All right, Judge Merritt said, did any of those things affect your ability to follow the court's instructions on the law during the trial? She said, repeat that again. He said, did any of those things affect your ability to follow the court's instructions with regard to the law during that trial? Oh, no. Judge Merritt continued, and do any of those three things affect any of your decisions during that trial whatsoever? No. All right. Anything else? At that point, Brian said, I have a few questions to follow up to that. Judge Merritt actually said, all right, briefly, go ahead. Now, I might just remind you, Judge Merritt already knew that years before, almost 10 years ago, the juror's daughter had recanted. She was still sticking to her story all these years that she recanted. She lied. She made it up. He never touched her inappropriately. He knows this, and yet he's badgering this witness like a prosecutor. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. I came into this being very upset at this juror who destroyed this family's life. And instead, I'm sitting there feeling terrible for her. She's crying. She's shaking. I felt terrible. And I knew then, though, that Take Chan wasn't coming home. Not yet. Brian, as a follow-up, said, now I want to make sure I understand clearly. And he's asking the juror again, at the time of the trial, when you were sitting in jury selection, you knew that you had family members involved in law enforcement, correct? Yes, at the time. Brian said, I'm sorry. She said, yes. He said, yes. She said, yes, a third time. He said, thank you. I don't have any further questions. Then he redirected. Brian said, right. That was my recollection of what she testified when I asked her before the court inquired, is that she was aware that they were involved in law enforcement at the time of the trial, despite being estranged. And then he said to the juror, "I see you nodding your head. Is that correct, ma'am?" And she said, "That's correct." So now she's just admitted again that even though they were estranged, she knew sitting in jury selection that she had two cousins in law enforcement and lied. But that's not where it ends, because Judge Merritt decided that he was going to jump into this again. He said, "All right, well, if you're deceased, you can't be involved in law enforcement at the time of trial. So the next question is with regard to, ma'am, is with regard to Joey. Did you or did you not know what line of work he was in at the time of trial?" She said, "I did not know." At the conclusion, Attorney Savy said, "The situation we have here is that this juror said she was not married, and she was actually married at the time. She did acknowledge that under oath. She said that she considered herself not to be married, but she was actually married at the time. Furthermore, we do not have a run-of-the-mill, garden variety, average connection to law enforcement. And I understand her testimony here today is that she was estranged from that aspect of her family or that part of her family. However, we have a situation where she acknowledged under oath that she thinks of this cousin every single day. She acknowledged that, and she made a Facebook post attesting to that. She testified here today that she does. She testified that she was thinking of him on the day of trial. We do not have a situation where I just have some menial, or I just guess menial connection to law enforcement, some minor connection with law enforcement. She has a cousin, a first cousin, who she indicated she was once close with, who was killed in the line of duty. This is a situation where if a defense attorney knew of that information, we're in a different set of circumstances. Not this, "Oh, I'm friends with the deputy, my neighbor's deputy, my brother-in-law in Pasco County is a sheriff." These are the types of answers that were given by the others on the panel. This juror was very well on notice, and I submit that she said multiple times under oath, and I understand where it was left. Her last testimony was that, "No, I didn't know that Joey was a law enforcement officer at the time." I submit that there's a record of her saying she did know at the time of jury selection. Take that for what it's worth. I think that the fact that she is inconsistent in that answer goes to show a lack of credibility in itself. At the time she knew, and again, I understand that the question was, are involved, and I understand where the court was going with the line of questioning with Anthony. You can't be involved in law enforcement if you're deceased. So I understand that aspect of the argument on the other side of not answering and rendering an answer when the court asked the panel of that particular question. However, I do submit that she did know Joey Forgione was a law enforcement officer. And if she had any question, the court said, "If you have any question about it, raise your hand if you don't understand a question." We have answers being given, and it's on the record. And I asked the court to take judicial notice of the transcript that was filed related to the voir dire that was filed on December 4th, I believe. I want to make sure I get the record correct. It's docket 408. These answers are all in, and the answers of the other jurors are all in there. We have an ex-brother-in-law. We have family and friends by marriage, people that are way beyond the connection and the strong connection that Miss Forgione had with her family members. Whether they're estranged or not, I submit that we have a situation where her answers here today that did not affect are not credible. I believe that there was an actual bias, and I think these answers here today even further demonstrate it. I submit at this point in time, she did know law enforcement or that her family members were involved in an aspect of law enforcement at the time of the trial by her answers on record here today. She did not say anything about it. She concealed that information. She concealed the information that she was, in fact, married by saying she was not married, which obviously made it more difficult to make this connection. But I submit that she thinks about this person every day. She's still thinking about him, and for good reason. I get it, and under different circumstances, if she had been If she had brought this, forth, I would feel sorry for her. I definitely would. But under these circumstances where we're hearing about it after the fact, where she didn't bring it to the court's attention, this is something that the parties needed to know about. This is something that I submit, would have resulted in a preemptory challenge from the defense. If they knew that a family member of a juror was killed within the line of duty as a law enforcement officer, I submit that there would have been enough for preemptory challenge, and that counsel would have exercised it regardless of any other answers that she would have been given at the time. So I submit that we have made a finding or made a showing of actual bias. I'm asking the court to make that finding and find that Mr. Rohe is entitled to a new trial because he had a juror who concealed material and relevant information that would have been material and relevant to the specific aspects of this case. And if the court recalls, and I put in my motion, then I'll end here. There were law enforcement officers that testified, whether she remembered it or not. And I'd ask the court to take judicial notice of the transcript. There was an officer who actually testified about child hearsay, about specific statements that were incriminating toward Mr. Rohe that would factor any credibility of a law enforcement witness. So I do submit that this aspect of the case makes this material. It's certainly relevant. I think the answers here today, the prior concealment, are all evidence of actual bias against Mr. Rohe, and I'd ask you to grant him a new trial. The judge decided to hold off on a ruling. Shortly after this happened, the order denying the defendant's motion came down the pike. I will say, though, after that hearing, meeting outside the courtroom with Take-Shan's family was painful. It shouldn't have gone the way it did. And we all knew, based on Judge Merritt's reactions and responses, that he was most likely going to deny it. He had already made that decision before he walked in the door that day. Why? I don't know. I can't know. It's like trying to prove bias. How do you prove that someone is biased when you can't read their thoughts? You don't know what's in their heart. You don't know what they really feel. It's like trying to prove someone's racist. You can't prove it just by looking at them. You can prove based on their reactions and their words and their decisions that they make. You can certainly come to the conclusion that they are racist. But the courts are demanding that we prove actual bias in Florida. How can you prove actual bias? You can't know what's in somebody's head, but can you know what they say and do that's not truthful? Yes. Can you show bias clearly by saying this juror said she was thinking about him? 4 years later, she posts this saying not a day goes by. So for 8 years, she thought about it. She knew that her other cousin had formed this amazing organization in his brother's honor, and their mother, her aunt, ran this company with him. They went to all different kinds of law enforcement organizational meetings and fundraisers. They accepted checks from law enforcement. He was involved in law enforcement at the time of Take-Shan's trial. But the judge chose to deny it. And I'm just going to read this because when you filter what you know now about the case, and as you know now, what really truly was said just weeks before this comes out, I think you will agree with me that this is not entirely truthful, because this version of what Judge Merritt heard during the juror interview is not at all what lines up with what I know to be true. He said regarding these two cousins, Ms. Forgione testified that she had been estranged from these family members since 1986. She knew they existed but had not had any contact with them for many years due to family conflict. Ms. Forgione testified at the time of voir dire in May 2012 she had no contact with them. Her cousin Anthony was deceased. She knew he was a law enforcement officer who was killed. However, she had no contact with her cousins at the time of Anthony's death and did not attend the funeral. She did not consider Anthony and Joey to be close family, and they did not come to mind when asked if she had a close family or friends in law enforcement. Now, see, that's not true. She said multiple times that she was thinking of him, and she did know. Judge Merritt said any relationship she has with Joey now began approximately 7 years ago after the defendant's trial. She stated that having these law enforcement officers in her family did not cause bias, prejudice, or an inclination to find the defendant guilty. Well, of course not after you badgered her and led her into those questions. She further testified that her association with Anthony and Tony did not affect her ability to be impartial, affect any decision at trial, nor affect her ability to follow the court's instructions. Well, of course not. If you have a judge asking those types of open leading questions that are a yes or no answer, they're not open-ended, so you don't get to give your opinion. You can only say yes or no. You're going to do whatever the court tells you to. Then he goes on to say the court finds Ms. Forgione, who was the only witness called, was forthcoming and credible. She had been estranged from her cousins for over 25 years and did not consider them to be close family members involved in law enforcement. Anthony Forgione was deceased at the time of trial. She was unsure if Joey worked in law enforcement at the time. Either way, it is clear she had no contact with either of them. I'm sorry, but that's not what I heard. Even if the court could find that Ms. Forgione had been dishonest, the defendant did not establish that the dishonesty resulted in prejudice or any actual bias against the defendant. Failure to prove prejudice is fatal to the defendant's claim, which was denied. Went to the appellate court, and these 3 judges denied. Take Chan is still in prison, and his family is still suffering. Was any of this fair? Not to me. How do you fix a system that is so biased against anyone accused of a crime? You come into court and everyone but you and your attorney and whatever family and friends might be sitting behind you, they're all the state. The judge is the state, the bailiff is the state, the clerk is the state, the jurors are picked from the state, the prosecution is the state, the witnesses are all the state, everyone's the state, and you're in their house. So good luck getting a fair trial. And even when we come back years later and show that this was not fair, this verdict is tainted by a juror who intentionally misled the court into believing she was someone who could be fair and impartial. But based on what I heard in that evidentiary hearing and what I've read today, there's no way she could have been. So we just continue to fight. We fight for justice. We fight for truth. And I'm so grateful that you watched. Thank you for being a part of this and allowing me to express my emotions and share a little bit of our stories. In the coming weeks, you will continue to hear about more of our clients who were wrongfully accused, falsely accused, wrongfully convicted, and how we found jurors who, like this juror, intentionally concealed material information that had they been truthful, had they been honest, they would never have been allowed on that jury because they were an inappropriate juror for that case. So thank you for watching. If you know of someone who has been convicted and needs our help, you will find our contact information in the description below. Be sure to like and subscribe. It means a lot that you follow us. I'm very grateful. Thank you again for taking time. And as we like to say, the courtrooms may be silent, but we won't be. So speak up, speak out, and always speak the truth.